Hi everyone, it's Amy and welcome to the channel, or welcome back. I hope that you're doing well. Let me know how you're doing in the comments below. Today we are talking about the books that I read in the month of November. I have a couple that are bleeding over from November into December. And first up is The Will of the Many, which I'm really enjoying. I'm about halfway, but I've just been a little bit slow reading it. And I've also been a little bit slow with our book club book. On my Kindle, we are reading Mad Ship. These are my Kindle stickers. We're reading Mad Ship by Robin Hobb in November. If you have been part of the book club, you know that we are a bit slow in reading. My husband and I read these books aloud together, so it's when we spend time together. And sometimes we watch TV, or sometimes it's just late, or whatever excuse. And anyway, we just end up taking a long time with these books. But I definitely am enjoying taking it slow with the Robin Hobb journey, because I see people finishing it and it's like, oh my gosh, this is such an amazing experience, but nothing's going to live up to it. So I want to prolong it as much as possible. But that is kind of what's carrying over into December. But let's get into the books that I read in November. So I am just going in the order that I read them, and I started off the month of November finishing Ship of Magic, the first book of the Live Trader series by Robin Hobb. And this is her second book in her Realm of the Elderlings universe. And this was definitely an interesting book for me. I rated it 4 stars. It was definitely one, again, that we took our time with. It was one that we read with the book club. It was definitely a different feel from the Farseer trilogy. We're following multiple characters' point of views, and we're dealing with a different section of the world of the 6 duchies. And it's definitely like with pirates and traders, and there's just a lot going on. And the first book is definitely like establishing this sort of section of the world and these characters. So it was a lot of world building in this first book, but the character work is so fantastic that even though the characters are infuriating and I just didn't necessarily like any of them all that much, they were still really relatable and I still really enjoyed reading them. So I definitely recommend making sure that you read all of the series within Robin Hobb's universe, because each of them are going to bring something to the table as far as the lore with the magic and the world. So I definitely think that it is worth reading, especially as I'm getting into this second book of the Live Ship Traders, Mad Ship. There is just so much that is coming unlocked, and a lot of that is dependent on understanding from the first book, Ship of Magic. Everything is very layered and nuanced, and I really love that. It's like it takes so much skill and craft to be able to build out that kind of world over time, over so many books, and just really creating this expansive universe. So I definitely enjoyed Ship of Magic, even though it was a different reading experience from the Farseer trilogy, but we were getting pirates. I love pirates, so I really enjoyed it, but definitely for the character work, I gave it 4 stars. Now, after Ship of Magic, I was kind of in a bit of a book slump, to be perfectly honest, and I saw some creators over on TikTok talking about making November Nostalgic November. And I thought it'd be really fun doing what they did, where they went back to some books that they read when they were younger and just kind of having a nostalgic reading experience. So the next book that I read was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. Everybody knows about this book and this story, but it was one that I really loved when I was a kid. I know I have talked about it in other videos, but it's just very nostalgic, and it was very interesting to read as an adult. I know I've watched the movies more recently as an adult, but the book is its own experience, of course. It was definitely interesting, like reading it and kind of seeing much more as an adult the very Christian themes that are in the book. Being raised in the church and everything, I understand that, but I didn't feel like it necessarily was something that gave or took away from the story or anything like that. So I think it's just a fantastic story with good and evil, and to me it was always a story that I loved, which I read multiple times when I was younger. it's just like your imagination coming to life where you get to be the hero going into this magic world and defeating evil. And I really love that about the story. So it was definitely interesting getting to go back and read it. And I experienced it through audiobook, which was a first for me. So it was really cool just kind of getting to experience it in a fresh way. And another book that I read via audiobook for my nostalgic November reads was The Hobbit. And I really enjoyed this audiobook because it was Andy Serkis, who plays Gollum in the Lord of the Rings movies. He was reading it and he did an amazing job. I highly recommend this audiobook. If you have read The Hobbit, if you've never read The Hobbit, if you enjoyed the movies or if you didn't, I honestly just would recommend it. It was pretty easy to get through, but I'm very familiar with the story. I read the book like back when I was like in 6th grade, and of course seen the movies and all of that, but it's just a fantastic story. And of course Tolkien is the godfather of fantasy. So this is kind of in my mind where that love of fantasy sort of started for me as far as reading like higher fantasy. So getting to experience that and have someone really bring it to life with the audiobook like Andy Serkis did was just so fantastic. And of course, it was kind of weird like rating these books that I really enjoyed when I was a kid, but of course I gave The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and The Hobbit 5 stars. So I kind of got out of the book slump after reading these nostalgic reads, and I decided to finish off the Shepherd King duology with Two Twisted Crowns. I really enjoyed the first book, One Dark Window. It was just this fast-paced fantasy, and I wanted to finish it off. And I gave this book 4 stars, which I believe I gave the first book 4 stars as well. I enjoyed this. I don't know if I enjoyed it quite as much as the first book, but I still think it was really solid and a great conclusion to this duology. If you want something that is like a fast-paced fantasy that has some romance in there, I would definitely recommend these. It's very like gothic and atmospheric, but there's a lot of action and intrigue and very interesting magic. And in the second book, we're getting multiple POVs, unlike the first book, which I thought was pretty interesting. But it's really interesting how each character, even the side characters, are pretty well built and are significant to the story. And for me, what unfortunately like detracted a little bit was in the beginning of Two Twisted Crowns, it was very focused on a side character and a romance that's happening between two different side characters, really. But I just felt like it was a little bit too much focused on that. And there was more spice in the second book, which I'm not a spice person. So that was a little bit of a deterrent for me. But I still really loved their chemistry and where the relationship went in the book. So I definitely think it redeemed itself, but it was just a little bit of a detractor in the beginning. But we definitely got to a really great conclusion in the book. So I really enjoyed it, and I think that it is definitely worth the read. I think it would be great for this time of year. It's kind of dark and brooding, and I think would be really great for the cold months. I would definitely recommend it if you want something that's kind of an easier to read fantasy that's fast-paced. Now, my next book is one that I have actually DNF'd a couple of times, but I was just determined to read this and be able to have a full opinion on it. And I'm really glad that I did. I read Legendborn by Tracy Deonn, and this is a pretty popular YA kind of urban fantasy. It is just a fantastic story where we're following a young Black girl who is accepted into this kind of elite program for teenagers at the University of North Carolina. And she witnesses something really strange and magical and impossible, and she's kind of thrown into this weird magical world that's kind of like Arthurian legend inspired, but it really explores a lot of heavy topics in a really powerful way and done through a fantasy lens. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it. It does touch on some tough things. You know, the main character, she just lost her mom, so there's a lot of grief involved in the story, but there's also a lot of like history and racism that is addressed. in this sort of magical society that she becomes associated with. And it is just a really interesting experience. And the first couple of times that I tried to read it, I read physical, but I decided to try it audiobook this time, and it definitely made a much better reading experience. I would definitely recommend it if you've had maybe difficulty with it. I'm just not a huge YA person, but once you kind of get into the meat of the story, it definitely picks up, and the magic is just so unique and interesting. It kind of has this sort of like demon hunter vibe to it, but there's like a hierarchy of different magic users, these mages. My camera died, so it is kind of a knight and squire sort of situation, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. So I am definitely looking forward to reading the next book, and I know there's a third book that's coming out, I believe in 2025, so it's right around the corner, and I think it's definitely going to be worth the read getting into the rest of the series. Like, seeing how much was built out in the first book, I'm like, where else can we go with this? And I'm excited to see where the story goes. My next read is an ARC that I received through NetGalley, and it is a graphic novel, which I feel like I haven't had a graphic novel in a minute. But this was a really cool read. It is kind of a middle grade fantasy, magic realism sort of graphic novel, and it is called Lost in the Future, The Storm by Damien. Single name like Madonna, okay? So it is the Lost in the Future series, and the first book is called Storm. So this is going to be an ongoing graphic novel series, but this is about four kind of like ragtag kids who are on a field trip to these like castle ruins, and this bully kind of comes and picks on them, and they all end up being thrown into this portal, and chaos just kind of ensues. It is a field trip gone very wrong. But we've got some time travel in there and some really interesting characters. But it addresses a lot of kind of like adolescence and moving into like teenage years kind of struggles with identity and things like that. But we're also experiencing really interesting magic with time travelers and people from the past that are living in the future, and it is very, very intriguing. But it is out now, so you can go and read it. So I believe that this is a translated graphic novel, and so it has just been released here in the US in English. So it is available now, but I definitely would recommend it. I think all ages would enjoy this, even though it is middle grade. It kind of has this really interesting, slightly edgy sort of art, and it kind of gives this like grit to the story. And you just have some really lovable characters, some great diversity in there. We have some disability representation, different races represented, and the kids are just really lovable and kind of grow and change throughout the story. So I would definitely recommend. My next read is one that might be a controversial take that I have on, but we're going to get into it and we're just going to lay it out there. I read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, and I have seen so many people hype up this book, and I honestly don't know why. I have not given 2 stars to a book in quite some time. I initially gave it 3 stars, but the more I thought about it, the more I did not like it. So, so I gave it 2 stars, and honestly, I love V.E. Schwab's work. I read Gallant recently, and I thought that was a really fun book, and I absolutely enjoyed the Shades of Magic trilogy by her. But this was a really different book for her, in my opinion. It was kind of like literary fiction with kind of a fantasy element or magic realism. And we're following a girl who makes a deal with kind of a demon, a god, I don't know, but we kind of have a curse that is put on our main character. So she is basically immortal, but everybody forgets her. So the second you look away, you don't remember her. So it really causes her to lead this lonely kind of existence. And I have my full review on Goodreads. You can check out all of my reviews on Goodreads. I'm actually kind of using that for reference right now. But I just felt that this book was trying too hard. It was definitely an exploration of life and humanity, and it was trying to be like existential, but I just felt like it was trying too hard. And I understand that we were exploring like this lonely existence. I felt like it just focused too much on these sort of fleeting relationships that she was trying to have with people who eventually are going to forget her, instead of like how she was experiencing history and things like that. There were like touches of that, but just not as much as I was hoping for. I think because I read a book that in my mind was like kind of in the same vein, but honestly better in my opinion than this book. I feel like maybe I had kind of a bias going into this. I just had maybe different expectations going into this book, but I don't want to like dampen my opinion of it because I just feel like the writing was not to the standard that I was hoping for, especially when it comes to V.E. Schwab's writing. I really enjoy her writing. It is colorful, but still I feel like easy to read. This was, it was easy to read, but it was also in theme and different topics that were explored difficult to read. I guess because it was a bit bleak, I feel like it was definitely a deterrent for me, and maybe I wasn't in the right mood to read the book, but it definitely is a bit bleak. And even though it has moments that I really enjoyed, there were different relationships and characters that she met that I felt brought something interesting to the table. And then her relationship with this god over her like 300-year life is very interesting, but I definitely was not a fan of the ending. I felt like it was really bleak. I don't want to give anything away, but in my opinion, it was very bleak. I just felt there was so much wanting with the book. You know, when you're trying to express your own personal opinion about it, it's kind of like, how do I just say that in my experience, I just didn't like it? But I want to give valid reasons for it. And I just felt like it was too bleak. And even though I feel like maybe that was the point, I felt like there could still have been more explored, like, because the character really enjoyed being able to be alive and wanted to experience things, but I know that was also being taken away from her at the same time. So in that we're supposed to experience her pain, I understand, but I also wanted to experience more of her joys as well. I feel like that is a better way to explain how I feel about it. So I gave Addie LaRue 2 stars, and I'm going to stand on that, and that's going to be it. Okay, I realized that I mentioned there's a book similar to Addie LaRue, but I didn't actually say what it was. So if you're wanting a book that's similar, but in my opinion was better, I would recommend A Short Walk Through a Wide World by Douglas Westerbeek. And this is about a woman who experiences life in this sort of lonely way, similar to Addie LaRue, but she has this disease that will shut down her body if she doesn't stay on the move. So she's having to kind of travel the world alone several times over, but it's much more about the adventures that she has and experiencing history and sort of seeing life in a positive way despite there being this loneliness. I feel like it has this sort of existential feel to it. Unlike where Addie LaRue is trying too hard, I feel like Short Walk is just kind of, it just flows and it just happens. And I feel like you get to have that sort of existential crisis within a book without it being the sort of bleak thing that you're trying to force. So that's just my opinion. Maybe that sounds harsh, but I feel like it just explores like history and being able to experience different parts of the world and have a much more like magical experience than Addie LaRue does. I feel like the focus of Addie LaRue is definitely not like magic, even though that is there. So if you're wanting something that's more magical, I would recommend Short Walk. If you enjoyed Addie LaRue, you still may enjoy A Short Walk. So I think either way, I would recommend it. Centering around this book, whether you liked Addie LaRue or not, I still think that you would probably enjoy Short Walk. So for me, I just think it's going to be a better book, so that is my recommendation. All right, and so let's go to the last book that I read, and I squeezed in a Christmas book as we are getting into the Christmas season. I read The Christmas Tree Farm, which is the third book of the Dream Harbor series by Lori Gilmore. And I read The Pumpkin Spice Cafe and wasn't a huge fan, but I feel like I wanted to give it another try and just see where it went. I thought maybe I could be more into the Christmas vibe. And I feel like this was definitely a more solid book than the Pumpkin Spice Cafe. I felt like the romance was solid. I felt like the mystery part was not too emphasized, unlike the Pumpkin Spice Cafe. I felt like it was just kind of peppered in there, and it had a better conclusion than the Pumpkin Spice Cafe. So I definitely think that this is a better book, but this was definitely spicy. Spicy for me, definitely. Even with the spice, I feel like it was still like sweet, and I felt like the two had a really good connection, but it was definitely like a thirsty kind of book. They're constantly like, oh, he's so muscular and she's so pretty and da 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 da. And there's definitely like those pining, thirsty sort of thoughts in both of their POVs. So just be aware of that. But I still thought it was really fun. It's in a small town. You've got these great Christmas vibes with like Christmas markets and festivals. There's a Santa and of course the Christmas tree farm itself. But I really love the small town that Gilmore has created with these books, and it definitely draws me in wanting to read other ones. I just wish it wasn't as spicy as they are. So I don't know if I'm going to continue reading them, but I think this is a good, cheesy, sort of no brain power romance for the Christmas season, for the holidays, that I think most people would enjoy if you enjoy a rom-com. It was pretty fast to get through. I enjoyed the audiobook. Just be aware that it is spicy. Okay guys, those are all the books that I read. I didn't get as much in this month as I have in previous months, but I feel like I had some really solid reads, so I'm happy with the, I believe, 8 books that I read this month. But let me know if you have read any of these and what your thoughts were. We can duke it out in the comments over Addie LaRue if you want to. But I hope that you enjoyed this video, and my next video is going to be a bookish holiday gift guide, so definitely be looking out for that next week. But let me know what you read in the month of November, and I will see you guys soon. Bye!